A black single mom boards a flight with her crying infant. Clutching more than just a baby, she carries grief, exhaustion, and the weight of survival. The judgmental eyes of passengers close in, until a quiet stranger beside her makes an unexpected offer. When she wakes hours later, her world has already begun to shift, but not in any way she could have imagined. What follows is a story of chance, reckoning, and the kind of help that doesn't come with strings, but comes when you least expect it. The terminal buzzed with late-night weariness as Malia Freeman shuffled forward, cradling her wailing 6-month-old son, Elijah. Her arms ached, her back throbbed, and her eyes burned with the kind of exhaustion that came from far more than lack of sleep. The red-eye flight to New York was her only option, cheap, quiet, and unassuming. But as she stepped into the narrow aisle of the plane, her hopes of a peaceful ride began unraveling with every sharp glance and hushed murmur from passengers already settled into their seats. She murmured soothing sounds to Elijah, who only grew more frantic, his tiny fists balled tightly, cheeks red from relentless crying. The sound of his distress echoed through the cabin, mingling with the rustle of boarding passes and the click of overhead bins. Malia avoided everyone's eyes, but she could feel them, cutting, judging, tired of her before she'd even sat down. Row 18. Window seat. She squeezed past a tall man in a dark gray suit who barely looked up from his tablet as she settled in with Elijah, juggling the baby bag, her purse, and her sanity. She rocked Elijah against her chest. Nothing helped. His cries pitched higher, more urgent. A woman across the aisle sighed audibly. A man, too, rows ahead, muttered something under his breath. Malia's face burned. The cabin was too warm, her sweater too tight, and her grief too fresh. The funeral, the motel, the rejection letter she still carried in her bag. Everything was unraveling in real time, and she could do nothing to stop it. "May I?" She turned, startled. The man beside her had finally looked up, his voice calm and deep, a stillness in his tone that made her pause. He gestured gently toward Elijah. "I've held a few babies in my time," he added. Malia blinked. Strangers didn't usually offer to hold other people's babies, especially not polished, sharply dressed men with expensive wristwatches and an air of practiced attachment. But something in his eyes disarmed her. Not pity, not impatience, just quiet concern. She hesitated. Elijah shrieked again. Her hands trembled. "Okay," she whispered. He took the baby with surprising ease, settling Elijah against his chest. There was no magic trick, no bouncing, no shushing, but somehow the baby stilled. A small, startled hiccup escaped Elijah's throat, then silence. Just like that, Malia exhaled, her shoulders sagging. The man's suit smelled faintly of cedarwood and something earthy, like old books and fresh rain. She watched Elijah's eyes flutter closed. "I don't know how you did that," she said, voice barely above a breath. He smiled, not taking his eyes off the baby. "Sometimes they just want someone new." She managed a faint chuckle, her first in days. The seatback screen blurred in front of her. She rubbed her temples, then leaned back into the headrest. Her body was giving up the fight. And now, blessed silence. A quiet so rare it almost brought tears to her eyes. "Just wake me if he fusses," she murmured. But he didn't reply. Maybe he knew she wouldn't last another minute. Her head dropped forward, then sideways. Somewhere between turbulence and takeoff, her body gave incompletely. Her cheek came to rest gently on the man's shoulder, her breathing steadying with each mile the plane climbed into the night sky. She didn't notice the way he adjusted, careful not to jostle her, or the way his hand stayed secure at Elijah's back. The cabin darkened. Sleep wrapped itself around her, deep and dreamless. The plane landed with a jolt. Malia gasped awake. The lights had come up. Passengers rustled around them, grabbing bags, stretching stiff limbs. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then her eyes darted to the man beside her. Her head had been on his shoulder. Her baby was still asleep, swaddled against him. She sat upright, mortified. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," she blurted, reaching for Elijah with frantic hands. I didn't mean to. I must have. The man turned to her, unbothered, the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You needed the rest, he said simply. Malia's cheeks flushed hot as she clutched Elijah close, her heart thudding from the sudden return to reality. She opened her mouth to speak again, to thank him, or explain herself, but before she could find the words, he reached into the inner pocket of his blazer. Here, he said, holding out a small, embossed card. In case you need anything. She took it with trembling fingers, eyes scanning the crisp lettering. Julian Graves, CEO, Haven Bridge Holdings. Her breath caught, and just like that, the cabin didn't feel so small anymore. The name struck her like a stone in the chest. Haven Bridge. Of all the names in all the places, the weight of it was immediate and deeply familiar. 2 months ago, she'd applied to their housing assistance program. She'd written a careful letter, scanned every document twice, and poured her pride into the form. She had hoped, not for a miracle, but just enough. A safe place for Elijah. A start. The rejection had come quickly and coldly. We regret to inform you. Her eyes flicked toward the man, Julian, now standing to retrieve his coat from the overhead compartment. She studied him, the cut of his suit, the poise in his movements, the kind of man she never expected to share airspace with, let alone a quiet, intimate moment on a red-eye. He glanced down and caught her staring. I see you noticed the card. She hesitated. Haven Bridge, she said, her voice quieter than she expected. I applied to your housing program. A while back. Julian nodded. I know. The words landed oddly. She narrowed her eyes, unsure if she heard right. I saw your name on the manifest, he continued, lowering himself into his seat again as passengers filed past them. It caught my attention. It sounded familiar, so I looked into it. Malia's grip on Elijah tightened slightly. Julian's voice softened. I remember your application, and I want to say, I'm sorry. Her breath caught. It was denied, she said, not needing him to finish. I got the email. Said I didn't qualify. He looked her directly in the eyes, a faint crease forming between his brows. It was an error, a clerical mistake, buried under other reviews. Your file never should have been rejected. I reviewed it myself after seeing your name. Malia stared at him, the cabin fading into a blur of people in motion. I don't understand, she said slowly. Why would you? How could that even happen? I wish I had a better answer, Julian replied. But sometimes things fall through the cracks. And people like you shouldn't have to pay for that. Malia's jaw tightened. There were so many things she wanted to say. She wanted to scream that his apology didn't undo the nights Elijah had cried in that freezing motel room, that she had sold her nursing textbook for diapers, that a clerical mistake had nearly broken her. But she didn't. She just looked at him. Thank you, she said finally, her tone even careful. I appreciate you telling me. He nodded. If there's anything I can do to... No. The word came quickly, sharper than she meant. Julian blinked, caught off guard. I mean, she softened, thank you. But I'm used to figuring things out myself. I'm not offering out of pity, he said gently. I know, she replied. But I'm not ready to owe anyone anything. There was a long pause between them. The plane door clicked open. People began shuffling forward. Julian stood, straightening his blazer. Fair enough. She clutched Elijah a little closer, rising to join the line. As they stepped into the aisle, Julian glanced back at her, not expectantly, just briefly, as if committing her face to memory. Malia looked away. Whatever kindness he offered, she wasn't ready to take it. The motel room smelled faintly of old carpet and cheaper cleaning supplies. Malia sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Elijah against her chest. He was asleep again, his tiny chest rising and falling with that rhythmic peace babies seemed to know instinctively. She rocked gently, even though he didn't need it now. Maybe she did. A duffel bag rested at her feet, the one she'd nearly left behind at baggage claim before realizing halfway to the parking lot. She'd been too tired, too emotionally spent, and far too numb after the funeral arrangements to go back for it. There wasn't anything valuable inside. Just a few changes of clothes, Elijah's blanket, and an old photo of her father she hadn't been able to throw away. Her father. Even now, the word sat heavy in her chest. She hadn't cried. Not at the hospital. Not when the call came. Not even when she saw the obituary with his name printed in neat serif type. Not yet. Their relationship had always been broken. Years of silence, missed birthdays, too many apologies offered too late. But blood still bound them, and grief didn't always require permission. She shifted Elijah in her arms, staring at the water-stained ceiling. She hated this room, hated its echo of desperation. She could feel it clinging to her skin. But it was what she could afford, close enough to the funeral home, and just barely clean enough for her baby. Then a knock. She blinked, startled. A quick glance at the digital clock. Nearly 9 p.m. Another knock. Firmer this time. Carefully, she laid Elijah down in the bassinet near the bed, heart suddenly cautious. When she opened the door, she found him. Julian. The same calm eyes. The same tailored composure. Only now, out of place in this narrow, flickering hallway. In his hand, her bag. "You left this," he said simply. Malia stared, words stalling in her throat. "I asked one of the flight attendants where you might be staying. It wasn't hard to track down." He paused. "I hope that's not intrusive." She stepped back wordlessly, holding the door open. He entered quietly, setting the bag beside the dresser. His eyes swept over the room, not with judgment, but a kind of measured understanding. Like he'd seen it before. "Thank you," Malia said finally, closing the door behind him. Julian glanced toward the bassinet. "He's out. He's a better sleeper than I deserve," she said, almost smiling. Julian nodded, folding his hands in front of him. "You didn't have to bring this here," she added. "I know." Silence stretched between them. Malia sat down again on the bed, unsure if he would speak further, unsure if she even wanted him to. Then he said, "My mother raised me in a place a lot like this." She looked up. "Single mom. 3 jobs. We moved motels more than most people change bedsheets." She used to cook soup in a hot plate hidden in the nightstand drawer. Malia blinked. "She had this quiet grit," Julian continued. "Didn't complain, didn't ask for help. Just kept going. People respected her for that. But it also meant no one offered anything unless she was desperate enough to beg." He met Malia's gaze. "She never wanted me to forget where I came from." That explained the coach seat. "You fly in economy to remember," she said quietly. "I fly in economy," he replied, "so I don't forget who I'm supposed to be serving." Malia nodded slowly. She didn't trust easily. Life hadn't given her much reason to. But there was a sincerity in Julian's voice she couldn't dismiss. Still, she felt herself pulling inward, protecting the part of her that had been rejected too many times by her father, by systems, by circumstance. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Because," he said, stepping back toward the door, "when I saw you on that plane, holding it all together with nothing but instinct and exhaustion, I thought." He trailed off. His hand rested on the doorknob. "I thought of her," he said finally. "And I see a lot of her in you." Then he opened the door and stepped into the hallway, closing it gently behind him. Malia sat motionless, the quiet of the room pressing in. Elijah stirred softly in his sleep. She looked at the door for a long time, unsure what she was feeling. But something had shifted. She knew that much. A modest arrangement of lilies sat atop the closed casket, and next to it, a faded photograph of Malia's father in his younger days, strong-jawed, clean-shaven, looking out a life he never fully lived up to. Malia sat in the second pew, Elijah nestled in her lap, miraculously quiet. Her fingers toyed with the frayed corner of the funeral program. It had been hard to put it together. Harder still to write the 2 short paragraphs that now attempted to summarize a man she had spent most of her adult life estranged from. He was complicated, kind sometimes, absent often. He tried, in his way, but his way had never been enough. The pastor spoke first, gentle words about redemption and unfinished business. Then came family. A cousin who remembered their shared summers, an aunt who spoke more about heaven than the man being buried, and a younger brother who broke down midway through his tribute and had to be helped off the podium. Malia sat through it all, stoic, nodding at moments she couldn't connect to. Her grief was not loud. It was quiet and tired and lived somewhere deep below the surface of things. Then a shift. She heard it first, soft murmurs rolling through the pews. She looked up. Julian. He stood near the back, dressed in an understated black suit. No entourage, no flourish. Just him, somehow more present than anyone else in the room. Malia's breath caught as he made his way toward the front. People parted for him, whispering. Some recognized him. She could tell. Haven Bridge had a reputation. He had a reputation, but it wasn't a power move. There was something careful in the way he walked, almost deferential, like he understood the space he was entering. He stopped near the podium and glanced toward Malia, only for a second. Then he faced the crowd. "I didn't know Mr. Freeman personally," Julian began, voice clear and low. "But I know what it means to carry the legacy of a complicated parent." The room stilled. Even Elijah seemed to sense it. "I was raised by a woman who worked herself raw for her children. We didn't have much, but what we had, we survived on. Dignity, strength, and second chances." He paused, letting his words land. "I've learned, over the years, that sometimes what we inherit from our parents isn't their wisdom or their stability. It's their struggle. And from that, we grow. Sometimes in spite of them. Sometimes because of them." Eyes flicked toward Malia. She sat motionless, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "There's a particular kind of strength that lives in those who keep going when it would be easier to give up," Julian continued. "Especially mothers. Especially the ones raising children without applause, without support, without rest. The ones who show up every day not because they're asked to, but because they have to." The silence was thick, reverent. "We honor the dead best," he said, "by honoring the living who carry forward what was good and who do better with what was not." He gave a small nod and stepped down, returning to his place at the back of the church. No fanfare, no lingering. Malia's heart beat loud in her chest. She felt exposed, seen in a way that unsettled her. After the service, as mourners slowly made their way to the exit, Julian approached. He stopped just short of where she stood beside the casket, Elijah now back in her arms. "I know this wasn't my place," he said quietly, "but I meant what I said." Malia said nothing, but her eyes didn't leave his. The sky outside the community center was overcast, soft gray clouds hanging low as if the air itself were holding its breath. Malia stood at the edge of the cracked parking lot, Elijah on her hip, staring at the modest sign in front of her. Haven Bridge Maternal Empowerment Program, main office. She hadn't said yes. Not yet. After the funeral, Julian had explained it gently, how the program offered housing, childcare, job training, and access to education. A place designed not just for shelter, but for rebuilding, for women like her. But his offer felt like a lifeline wrapped in questions. She didn't trust easy help. Too many people had held out hands only to ask for something in return. So she hadn't given him an answer. But now here she was. Inside, the building was warm and quiet, the walls lined with photographs of smiling women and their children. A young receptionist welcomed her with a smile that wasn't forced, like she'd been waiting for her. No ID check, no judgment. Just an open door. "This way, Ms. Freeman. Mr. Graves said you might come by." Malia followed her through a short hallway until they stepped into a common area. The space was bright, clean, filled with the sounds of life. Laughter spilled from a playroom on one end, and the smell of something home-cooked drifted from a shared kitchen on the other. Women sat around tables, some with infants, some with laptops, one braiding another's hair as they chatted over coffee. Elijah stirred, blinking up at the ceiling lights, then nestled back against her. Julian stood near the back, speaking softly to a woman with a toddler clinging to her leg. He wore no suit this time, just jeans and a simple sweater, like he belonged here. When he looked up and saw Malia, he gave a small, respectful nod and excused himself. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," he said, joining her. "I wasn't sure either," Malia replied, eyes scanning the room. "It's different than I expected." "How so?" She shifted Elijah on her hip. "I thought it'd feel like a shelter. This feels like," she stopped. The word home hovered just out of reach. Julian nodded. That was the point. She looked at him then, carefully. Why me? He didn't hesitate. Because your application should have been approved the first time. Because you deserve a fair chance to breathe and to raise your son without the weight of everything crushing you. This program isn't charity, Malia. It's overdue justice. She looked away, blinking fast. She didn't want to cry in front of him, not after holding it together so long. You say that, she said, steadying her voice, but people always want something back. Julian's face was calm. You owe me nothing. The only thing I want is for this place to do what it was built to do. Give women like my mother, like you, the room to become who they already are. She let the silence sit for a moment, letting the hum of community wash over her. No one stared at her here. No one flinched when Elijah fussed or looked down on the baby bag slung across her shoulder. These women, they were real. They were tired and beautiful and surviving. A small girl toddled past her, giggling. A woman at a nearby table waved at Malia, then turned back to a workbook open in front of her. Julian was still beside her, but he didn't press. And maybe that was what made her decision clearer. She looked down at Elijah, kissed his forehead, then raised her eyes to Julian. I'll do it, she said. His smile was quiet, but she saw the relief in his eyes. You won't regret it. I'm not doing it for you, she added quickly. I know, he replied. That's why it's going to work. She turned toward the front desk again as Elijah began to stir in her arms. Behind her, laughter rang out again. Someone called for help warming a bottle. Somewhere in the kitchen, music played faintly. Malia took a breath, the kind she hadn't taken in years. The apartment wasn't large, but to Malia, it felt like the top floor of a high-rise. Clean white walls, warm hardwood floors, and wide windows that pulled the sunlight in like an embrace. She stood in the doorway, holding Elijah, taking in the stillness of it all. For the first time in months, no years, there was no hum of someone else's television bleeding through the wall, no flickering overhead light buzzing with static. Just silence, light, and the smell of new beginnings. Elijah cooed softly, reaching for a ray of sunlight that fell across his mother's shoulder. Their few bags sat in the corner, the only remnants of the life they were leaving behind. Malia lowered herself to the floor, placing Elijah on a colorful play Matt the program staff had left for him. He wobbled a bit, tried to crawl toward the window, and toppled onto his side with a giggle. Malia laughed. A real one this time, unburdened, unhidden. It rose from somewhere deep inside her, from a place that had been starved of light and finally felt warmth again. She pressed her palms against the floor. Solid, safe, real. Over the next few days, she unpacked slowly. A set of thrifted plates appeared in the cabinet, one by one. A potted fern from another mom in the program found a spot on the sill. Elijah's books lined a short shelf near his crib, and on the fridge, she pinned the class schedule for the nursing program she would start on Monday. Her first day came with nerves, but not dread. The child care center attached to the Havenbridge facility was bright and busy, and Elijah barely noticed when she kissed his cheek and left. He was already engrossed in a bin of blocks, surrounded by toddlers and attentive staff. Malia hesitated in the doorway, then turned away before the lump in her throat gave her away. In class, she sat near the front, her notebook crisp and empty. The professor, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and tired eyes, reminded Malia of her own mother in some strange, distant way. The lesson moved fast, but not too fast. She could follow. She could do this. Between classes, she found herself invited into warm circles of conversation with other women from the program. Moms who carried their own stories in the set of their shoulders and the softness of their laughter. They talked about childcare pickups, job interviews, the best thrift stores nearby, and the little victories. Sleeping through the night, first steps, a passing grade. You'll find your rhythm. One of them told Malia over shared coffee and crackers. Takes a minute, but it comes. And slowly it did. The days began to stack like clean linens, soft, structured, comforting. Malia's life, once scattered and sharp at the edges, began to stretch into something she could recognize. Not perfect, but hers. Julian didn't linger. He checked in now and then. An email, a text asking if Elijah had outgrown the formula they provided, or if she'd found everything she needed for school. He showed up once to hand-deliver a donated stroller when hers began to wobble dangerously. But mostly, he stayed away, respecting the distance she'd asked for and trusting the program to do what it was built to do. Still, she caught sight of him sometimes. A brief hello in the hallway. A nod from across the courtyard. Always just enough to say, "I see you," but never more than she could carry. Weeks passed. One evening, as golden dusk spilled over the complex like a blessing, Malia sat on the steps outside her apartment. Elijah slept inside, and the night air carried the sounds of soft laughter, distant traffic, and someone's music playing faintly through a cracked window. Julian appeared from around the corner, walking slowly with his hands in his pockets. He paused when he saw her, as if unsure whether to continue. She met his eyes and gave a small nod. He joined her without a word, sitting a few steps below. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind that held space. The kind that understood things too big to say. They didn't talk about the flight, or her father, or even the program. They didn't need to. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and in that shared stillness, something passed between them. Something shaped like respect, grown in the soil of hardship and watered by quiet resilience. The sun dipped lower. The streetlights blinked to life. After a while, he stood. "I should go," he said softly. She nodded. "Thank you." He paused, meeting her gaze one last time. Then, with a faint smile, he turned and walked back into the evening. She sat for a long moment after he disappeared, arms wrapped around her knees, head tilted toward the stars, just beginning to blink awake. Later that night, Malia opened her journal and wrote, "Not every savior arrives with wings. Sometimes they come with a suit, a story, and a heart big enough for two." She closed the book, leaned over Elijah's crib, and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time, she believed it. If this story touched your heart, like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful, soul-touching stories that restore faith in humanity.